All right, thanks, and good morning, everyone. Um, yeah, so we're here today to talk about collaboration between Inventor and BIM 360. I think most of the presentation is going to focus on a, a review of the workflow itself, like doing it live. But I thought I'd, talk up front a little bit about, collaboration and some of the challenges with that. Um, We'll talk a little bit about the Vault to BIM 360 sync functionality and how that works. And then I said we'll finish up with a demonstration of how you can share data, pretty easily between Inventor and BIM 360 through Autodesk Vault and its sync capability. So Ashley said, as she said, you can ask questions in the question pane, and we'll try to answer those either as we go, if it kind of makes sense to answer them in context, or at the end of the presentation. So when it comes to collaboration with others, there are a lot of options these days and a lot of different scenarios in which case you might need to collaborate with others. When you're collaborating, say you're an Inventor user and you're collaborating with, maybe your customers are typically in the building industry, BIM 360 is becoming more and more popular, and I can see why. Preparing for this webcast was more or less my first real exposure to it, and it's an awfully neat tool. I really like it. And I can see why it exists, because, when you're trying to collaborate with others, there's a lot of information that may need to go back and forth, right? You get, requirements from your customer, feedback on your design. You need to provide, if they're using BIM, you need to provide a 3D model, maybe spec sheets about your equipment, installation instructions, and those are just the things, that I thought of off the top of my head. There's any number of things, that information and data that you need to share. And, these days there's a lot of ways to share it, right? You've got Dropbox, email, the old standby. I don't know how many people are actually still, sending things out, like physical copies. In some cases, you may still need to do that, right? But, if we're talking about this webcast and the workflow is really about, maybe companies that do, custom order equipment for the building industry. The example we have here is like a relatively simple, like air conditioning unit. But the process may start with you getting an RFQ with the requirements, for the equipment that you're being asked to provide. You're then going to typically provide a quote document that you need to somehow get to the customer. If it all looks good, you get an order. You then complete your design, at least for initial design review. And then depending on, the situation, there may be a fair amount of iteration. Review with the customer, make a change, they review it, iterate again. Hopefully this is minimized, but, every time you have to go through this loop, you're just adding, difficulty in terms of execution because of all the communication that needs to happen. But it doesn't end there, because once you actually build it, you've got to get it installed. You've got to update your documentations for as-builts, and then even provide that information back to the customer. So, in this process, there's just tons of communication, emails going around, phone calls, meetings, right? Just, all sorts of things can go wrong. I don't know about you, I get anywhere from 50 to 100 emails a day. Outlook rules are nice, but it's always possible to miss an email or, misunderstand an email. Phone calls can be even worse because they're not documented. I remember this was years ago, but we had a customer that they were collaborating through hard copy, and so they would actually use UPS to ship documents overnight to the customer, and then they would mark them up and the customer would ship them back, and they were just spending absurd amounts of money just to get hard copy, drawings to a customer for review. Meetings these days, again, I don't know about you, I have meetings all day long, and the time, every minute you're spending in a meeting, you're not getting, other work done. And these days too, when we're not necessarily all working at the same time, not just because of time zones, just because, you know, what life has done to us all over the last few months. You know, it can be hard to schedule a meeting, period. So all of these things just make collaboration and getting work done efficiently, you know, that much more difficult, right? So, you know, thinking about these challenges, you know, wouldn't it be nice if all the documentation you needed associated with a given, you know, project you're working with a customer on could be just in one spot? Um, so you knew that if anyone said, where is this, you know, file, or where is this PDF, or where's this drawing, you know, if you want, if on either end, if you want to know what everyone's working against, there's one spot for it. And what if you had good access control to that, right? It wasn't just a Dropbox folder, you know, sitting in the cloud somewhere. There's actual control, whether who can edit this data, who can see this data, and that there was a version history of this data. So if something changed, you could actually see what changed, and depending on, you know, the format, say a Revit model, you could actually compare the two different versions to see, you know, in this massive model, okay, what's different? Where did they move our equipment? And what impact is that going to have on things? You know, markups. Markups can be so difficult to share, but if you're using something like BIM 360 and the large model viewer, it's really pretty neat. The asynchronous nature of it, I think, is particularly compelling. The example we have for you today, we're going to be working on it together in real time, which is nice. So if you know, you are on a meeting with someone and, you know, you want to be able to mark things up, you don't have to rely on maybe Zoom or GoToMeeting markup controls. You can actually mark up in the viewer and save those markups. But maybe you sneak a few minutes to work, you know, later in the evening after the kids are in bed, you could, you know, call it up, do some markups, and then an email can go out to everybody. And then when they finally get a chance to do their work, they can take a look at it and keep the process moving. And of course, again, the documentation being accessible from everywhere, right? Maybe so you don't have to be connected to the slow VPN that you're forced to use because you have to work from home. And what if you could just keep using the tools you still use every day, Inventor, Revit, Vault, and have all of the above while keeping the data that you want to keep proprietary and safe, but easily share that data with people outside the company, right? So that's what BIM 360 and the collaboration, the sync with BIM 360 and Vault kind of brings to the table, right? So BIM 360 gives you all of this stuff here at the top: the common location for your documentation, access control, version history, better communication, anywhere accessibility. All of that comes with BIM 360 and the fact that it's in the cloud. The key, though, is making it easy for you to take your existing workflows, your existing procedures, and just integrate BIM 360 with all of that. And again, that's where the Vault Sync comes in. You can link a folder in Vault to a folder in BIM 360. And that simple action makes it super simple to just push a data, like a file, up to the cloud, pull files from the cloud. That way you keep local control over the documents. You keep your own local copy, you know, just to be safe, but then make it very easy to share. And you can do this either on demand. So you can say, I want to push a file up or bring a file down, or you can actually set it to automatically synchronize to keep all of this data in sync. And what's really interesting is, just like Vault has version control, so does BIM 360. So if I put a Vault document in my Vault, synchronize it to the cloud, make a change to my local document, synchronize it again, BIM 360 will keep a version history of those changes. So you're not just overwriting data there. You always have that history. Now, it's really interesting the way it works, and it's important to understand how it works in case you want to put it to use, because If you're not using some of the components that Vault has today, you may need to start using those. The key really is the Vault job processor and the Autodesk desktop connector. So the Autodesk desktop connector is free. Anybody can download it. And it's just an application. It's very much like, the Dropbox app for Windows, where you end up with a virtual folder, on your computer, right? We can just take a quick look here. This is my rather messy desktop, and we can see, by virtue of having the desktop connector installed and being logged in, I have a virtual folder here in my environment called BIM 360, and then all of the BIM 360 projects I have access to are available here on my desktop. And we can see there's a whole structure here. And you get special information about, who created this folder, who has access to it. And so some of these folders I can write to and some of them I can't. We're specifically in the manufacturing folder. And you get information about this. You can see the file is synchronized, so we're up to date with the cloud. What file version I have on my computer, I'm only gonna ever have the one version actually in my folder. But up on the cloud, I could see all of those versions and even compare between them, right? And if I add a file to this folder, it would get synchronized up to the cloud. Or if I updated a file in this folder, those changes would get synchronized. So that's ultimately how the Vault Sync works with BIM 360, is whenever we need to make a change to the Vault data, either push it up to the cloud or bring it down from the cloud, essentially Vault puts a job in the existing job queue that you might already be using to make PDFs or DWFs. And then a Vault client somewhere in the environment executes that job and does the synchronization, essentially by manipulating that local folder on the computer that's running the desktop connector, right? And so it's very straightforward to use. It's very easy. And if you've got it set up for automatic sync, you don't even really need to do anything to keep this stuff straight. It'll just automatically synchronize the data up or down. Right. All right, so that's a pretty brief introduction to things, but I think from here what we'll do is we'll just dive into a concrete example of this workflow in action. So the idea here is, Alice's company, she's a contractor, she's wants us to build an air handling unit for her. And so she has created a BIM 360 site for this project. There's a folder there for us to use. I would get an email from her saying, here, you've got access to this folder, you can get to work. And so what we're gonna do is I'm gonna go through the process of getting the RFQ, creating my new design, sending her a version of it to review. She can mark it up, then make any changes and we can discuss. I can make the changes in CAD, update the data in BIM 360, and then she can use that in her Revit model. And so we're gonna take this opportunity in doing this workflow to not only show you the synchronization, but also some other things, specific to the Inventor and Revit interaction that you may or may not be familiar with, the BIM content environment in Inventor. So yeah, we're gonna start by doing some things in Vault. So I'm gonna call up my Vault app in the cloud, right? And so we would do this through really just Vault configuration, right? So what I would do is I would go to my Vault settings, there'll be a collaborate tab here in the newer versions of Vault. And this lets me configure a cloud drive mapping. Now, this could be either to BIM 360, or if you're familiar with Fusion 360, that's the cloud file storage for the mechanical side of things. I will say I'm somewhat familiar with Fusion 360. Looking at what BIM 360 can do, BIM 360 is a lot more capable, it looks like, I think. There's just a whole lot there to BIM 360. But if you would rather, if you don't interact with people in the building world, and they're not using BIM 360, and you want to be able to collaborate more effectively with contractors yourself, or customers or suppliers, Fusion 360 would be another alternative, where it's more right now these days just more file storage and review. It still has the same version capability, the same somewhat similar access controls, similar viewing and markup capabilities. So while we're showing you specifically the interaction with BIM 360, you could still get something like this with Fusion 360 if you wanted to, again, just have your own complete solution for sharing, as opposed to relying on maybe one of your customers to grant you access to a BIM 360 site. All right, so we're going to create a new mapping, and this is very straightforward. This is going to be specific to, our RFQ here, and it really couldn't be any simpler. What you say is, this folder in my vault is mapped to this folder on the cloud. And this is going to show me all of the cloud folders I have access to based on the desktop connector, right? So I do have access to some Fusion 360 data, you'll see, but this is specifically the project that Alice shared with me. And you'll notice there are a couple of different icons here, because this will tell you these other folders I may have access to, I may not have access to, but in this case, I don't know that I can even see those. But the folder that I'm supposed to be working with is this manufacturing folder, and that's the one that I can actually link to. So you can get very carefully controlled permissions and set this up just the right way. You also have the option to say yes or no in terms of manually syncing the data, and you can set up a schedule where you could say, every day at a certain time, or periodically. I think the minimum is 8 hours, so it really is kind of designed to be a once a day generally kind of thing, or once a shift if you're that busy. But if you don't necessarily want to push all the data up or bring all the data down, you can do the manual synchronization, and that's what we're going to do here today. So just like that, it's set up. And from there now, I can download from the cloud drive, because remember, our first task here is to get the RFQ. And I could definitely go to the BIM 360 site and log in, and this is BIM 360, in my browser. This is that manufacturing folder that I just linked. There's a PDF that's got the RFQ in it, and I could certainly just download it here, but this would just bring it to my computer. And then if we wanted to keep track of this in Vault, so we've got the RFQ as they sent it to us, I then have to download it from my computer, go to the downloads folder, drag it into the Vault, do all that kind of stuff. Whereas with the synchronization, I can say, just give me that file and put it in my Vault. Right. Now, what that has done is it has put a job in the job queue for that manual download of files from BIM 360. And when we make that job fire, what that's really doing is saying, okay, go to my local cloud folder and pull that file out, right? So our Autodesk desktop app, you can always monitor that as well if you'd like, to see what actions may or may not be going on. In this case, because it was essentially a local file, it grabbed it very quickly and just put it in my Vault. So I just hit F5 there to refresh, and just like that, I've got the data straight from the cloud into my Vault. And now, depending on your rules that may or may not have been categorized, I could put this into, like the Office documents category and start tracking revision behavior on this in my vault if I'd like, right? But now I have that document in my vault and I didn't have to go through any other steps. It came straight from the cloud down into my vault. Right. So from there, we would, review the RFQ. Okay, they want an air handling unit. I think we've got that somewhere here. Maybe it's like one of our standard designs, and we're going to tweak it just a little bit for them. So this is where I might use copy design, and this is just standard, Inventor Vault stuff. We're going to make a new set of files for this RFQ. We're going to go and throw that into our design folder to keep the root level folder nice and simple. And we're just going to go ahead and rename all of these to our quote numbers. So this is going to get us a unique copy for this RFQ and for this customer, so that any changes they might want us to make to this, eventually we can get this executed. Right. Now this is a moderately complex assembly. I think there are a few hundred pieces to it, and one thing to keep in mind if you're ever sharing data with Revit, you're going to make life for the Revit user, which may be your customer, a whole lot easier if you simplify that design, right? If you make sure that all of the extraneous bits and pieces that you don't need are removed somehow. And we're going to take a look at how you can do that in Inventor using the shrink wrap capability. It gives you the ability to, lots of powerful tools to decide what gets included and what doesn't. And again, the more you can take out while still maintaining what the architect needs for space claim and hooking up services to it, the better. Right. So we'll just get this opened up in Inventor. And our first step here is to make sure that we're sharing the model with our customers so that they can review it and let us know if it didn't need any sort of changes. Is this what they were expecting? Is this going to work for them, right? And that's where the substitute comes in. So that command is available here on just the assemble toolbar. But I also want to start showing you the BIM content environment first, because the shrink wrap is front and center in this environment as well. So eventually we will be authoring some content here to say where the various services hook up. We're supplying air, we're bringing in coolant. But before we do all of that, before I go to authoring all this, I want to make sure this is what my customer is expecting, right? This is, the envelope that we have to work in is good, and this is, the various things that we talked about that they wanted to get from us. This is what's going to work for them. And again, we really should simplify this. We can see there are 376 occurrences in this document, and the guidelines I've seen. And Inventor will even warn you about this, I believe, is if you have more than 250 components, that's probably going to make using that model in Revit painful. Now that's really kind of an upper bound. You should shoot for as few components as possible, right? And there are various ways we can do this. We could say, for example, I want to remove parts by a particular size. So I could say, get rid of everything that is, about this size, right? And it's going to automatically fill that out for me. And then everything with a diagonal bounding box measurement of that size or smaller just goes away, right? So everything left is bigger than that. So if I want to get rid of slightly larger components, maybe click on one of these guys, and what we'll see is a lot more is going to go away now. And this is a pretty good way to get a head start on what you're going to take out. So we've already gotten rid of 150 pieces. And it looks like our intent is mostly still properly communicated. But what you may not have noticed is there was some welding pads down here that are probably somewhat important to the design. And so I'm able to switch back and forth quickly between what's included and excluded, and just include some, or exclude, re-include, I should say, those pads so that we get, an accurate footing for this guy. And then from there, if it looks like maybe I won't be able to get, everything that I want still included, I might then resort to picking specifically, like all of these things probably don't need to be there. So now rather than removing by size, I can just drag myself a window, and everything that crosses this window will go away, right? So now we're down to 127 individual bits. I know the fans here are just overkill. They don't need to see those. Notice I'm only picking in one subassembly, and it's grabbing the components in both, right? So it's pretty easy to very quickly eliminate a lot of extra bits that don't really need to be seen in the model. And you'll be doing whoever uses this model in Revit a huge favor. So I think that's okay for now. So from there, we just hit OK, and it's going to create that shrink wrap substitute in this assembly for me. Now, this is, again, default Inventor functionality, whether or not you're using it with the intent to share with Revit. And I'm going to go ahead and log into the vault. Interesting. Didn't want to create that for me. Let's go ahead and save the changes. But this is the base assembly. For whatever reason, maybe I didn't have this checked out. I thought I did, but it should still have saved that shrink wrap assembly for me. Let's take a quick look. So we were working in our RFQ folder, right? Yeah, so this was the substitute that it created. For whatever reason, it didn't save it into my assembly as a level of detail. That's normally what would happen, though, is that tool would automatically create a level of detail representation in the assembly and use this substitute as that shrink wrap substitute. But I think we'll just continue on with just this part, because ultimately this is all we really need to share with the Revit user and our customer. Is we can use this part file both for collaboration, for markup purposes, but ultimately we can author the BIM content onto this assembly, onto this shrink wrap model. And you'll notice it really is just this one occurrence now. It's a single document with one occurrence. It has, multiple solid bodies, which would potentially allow control of each thing from a visibility perspective, depending on how you, use this file. But it's much, much simpler than it was, right? Now we need to get logged into our vault here, because I do want to check this in, because part of the point of this is we want to share this easily with our customer, right? And that's going to let me do this. I can check this file in. It's going to be in my vault. And now I can synchronize that information up to the cloud. Now, I think that ended up in my design folder. I think what I'm going to do is just move that to my RFQ folder here. Right. And anytime you're working in Vault, if you move a file around, you really need to make sure and get rid of your local copy. Otherwise, that's going to cause you no end of grief. So it's just a Vault tip if you are a Vault user. Right, so now in our cloud shared folder or synced folder, we have our substitute. And this is where we can upload this to the cloud drive. This is the only, mapping we have to this folder. And again, that has put a job on the queue that we can essentially force our job processor to run. And what happens in this case then is that job from the job processor copies that file out to our local folder, right? The desktop connector recognizes that the file is there and needs to be synchronized. And it's running now to do that synchronization. So within, usually it's a matter of seconds, it usually doesn't take too long. It ultimately gets that file copied up to the cloud. So we'll give that just a second. And then it will copy everything up. Now it looks like it might be copying up the whole thing. I'm not sure. We'll see. Yeah, it's wanting to synchronize that entire folder. So I think that's because I told the synchronization to include subfolders, and that's an option that so in this case, it's sending up all of the relationships. So the upload to cloud, that is important to know, because the substitute uses the assembly, it tried to make sure all of the files you might need to synchronize are available. Thing to note about this synchronization, at least currently, BIM 360 does not understand relationships between Inventor documents. So if you were to review this Inventor assembly in BIM 360, it wouldn't have any concept of here's the assembly document that uses these sub-assembly documents that in turn use these components. BIM 360 doesn't have that functionality built in. If you use Fusion Team, however, Fusion Team does have that capability. And it has the capability to show relationships between drawings and assemblies and parts, and even track that version capability. So if you're looking for strictly Inventor collaboration, say with customers or with contractors, Fusion Team would be a really good thing to look at. We're using BIM 360 in this context to show you some of the other capabilities of the Autodesk environment. Specifically those around what the building industry is starting to use as a standard, I think. And so if you supply equipment to the building industry, then you very well could be asked to work with it. And if you've got Vault Professional, at least you can do this synchronization, and it's very straightforward. All right, so our file is up to the cloud now. It's this 00352 substitute. And then when we look at this part, what we'll be able to see here in the large model viewer is this is essentially the simplified version of the assembly that we copied up. And now it would be Alice's turn to take a look at this data. She could, I believe, and I think Alice is here with us still, I think she could get an email.
I'm here.
Something. Yep. Hi, Alice. So would you have gotten an email when I uploaded a file? Could you have gotten notified that something new was there?
Yes, you can make adjustments to the folders to say that you want to be notified when an update takes place in a folder, and it will shoot you an email and let you know what file and who published it to that folder.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I wouldn't have had to send you an email and say, hey, I've got something for you to look at. You would have gotten notified and say, hey, there's something new there. Okay, great. So that's that asynchronous workflow if we would need it. Right. And so now it's your turn to take a look at the model and tell me how I did and if there's anything that I need to change.
Do you want to switch it over to me? And I can kind of do a few things on here.
So let me stop sharing, and I think that'll let you share, and then we can see what you see.
All right, so do you see my screen now?
Yep, see it just fine.
So I can do the same thing here on my end, and I can select on the same IPT file and take a look at it as Forrest did.
Can I think of course, I think Alice is cutting out now. Of course, right when she starts presenting, it looks like maybe there's some connectivity issues. Not entirely sure. So we'll give her just a second to see if her connection improves. The wonders of working at home these days, just like a lot of us are, I think.
Issue to an individual.
Alice, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so I think something broke up there for a while and we couldn't hear or see anything, but I think you're back now.
Okay, let's see if it's.
Yeah, so I can see your screen just fine, yeah. I don't know if it's trying to catch up the video or not.
Yeah, it looked like something happened because it didn't save my, so I might have got kicked off and didn't realize it. So here, we'll do it again real quick.
Okay. Sure.
So I was just saying, well, we can go in if we need to make a change. Like I'm going to ask if we can move this compressor out about 3 feet. So I can do a simple markup here. And maybe I'll just say I want to put in some text to say, hey, can you move this out 3 feet? Of course, you want to be as specific as possible, but just keep it quick. And what I was saying is up here, if I say this markup right now, I'm the only one that can see it. But I can also say that I want to save this markup and publish it. And in doing so, everybody on the project can then see that markup. We also have a tool called Issues, where you can actually issue the markup information to an individual so that they know that they're assigned a task. But either one of those can also use the folder permissions to be notified of changes within that folder so they can take a look at what's going on. I'll hand it back over to you.
Okay, great. And so now that Alice has published that markup, I can actually see that on my end. Let me start sharing that. Right. So here now is my screen, and it was, I did end up, but ultimately straight away, there's Alice's markup on my end. Right. So, within, seconds of her marking that up. So if you're on a meeting like we are today and working collaboratively, someone can mark up and then I can come back and take a look straight away and see what's going on. And this tells me what I need to do.
Yes, I add one other quick little comment. You can put attachments to that markup. So if there's a specific request or so forth, you can upload that from the project as well.
Right, yeah, perfect. So if there's like supporting documentation for this change, say we need to move this out because, we know the compressor on the intake side of this heat exchanger tends to experience more problems than the other, and we want to make sure it's more easily accessible for maintenance. That tells me what I need to do to make my design change, right? So that's my task now, is to go make the change that she requested, right? So what I'll do now is make sure I've got this checked out so that I can make my modifications to it. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to sit here and model a whole bunch of stuff. I've got some preset changes that I can make to this assembly. So for example, we need to adjust the base of the structure. So we're just going to replace this with a slightly longer version of it, right? And we know we need the compressor to move out. And so we can just change one of the constraints here to maybe this face here. No, this face here, right? I should have my faces and edges turned on. And then of course we need to adjust the piping. Now, you know, depending on what you're actually sharing with someone, you may or may not actually need to make all those changes. Eventually, we're gonna have to make these changes in our design though, right? So in this case, I just, you know, created a new set of piping that I can just drop in and get rid of the old one, right? So I've made my design change, if only it was that easy in reality, and I missed a few things there, but that's okay, especially for this situation. You know, we're not sharing that with Alice anyway. Now, I made this to my assembly. You know, we're gonna have to make this when we actually build this, so I made those changes, but I do need to update the shrink wrap because of the failure of it to create the design, the shrink wrap representation. I'm just going to open up that file on its own, but there still should be links to the underlying assembly. So I should still be able to edit the derived assembly and notice how it's updated here. And if I needed, as a result of this design change, if I needed to include something else, like so for example, I want to make sure they know where the gauges are. Maybe I can come back in here and say, okay, turn the gauges on so that they can see, you know, where they're going to end up in the final design. Right, just like that, now my shrink wrap substitute is updated with the changes, with the gauges visible, and I can save and check this into Vault and then get it back uploaded so that Alice can then review the changes and drop it into her model. Now, before we do that though, I need to make sure that the other information that she might need to use this in her Revit model is applied, and that we save it out in a format that's going to make it easy for her to use. Now, she could take in an SAT file, I'm sure, and use that, or a step file in Revit. But again, we have this BIM content environment, and that lets us do not only, you know, simplify things, but also add in UCS so that we can make sure that, you know, this is getting inserted in the right location, right? The right height, the right insertion point, because the way we model an Inventor is maybe not necessarily where the orientation that's going to be easiest to use in Revit. Z is going to be up in Revit, and we need to make sure that our model is similarly up. Otherwise, it can be pretty painful for the Revit user to try to reorient this thing. So the UCS is going to let us say, here's where we need to say this component should be inserted into the model. The Z value especially is extremely important. Now, in addition, we've got some services here. We're supplying cold air, right? So we can just pick these locations in the model and say, you know, this is going to be a supply, and we can actually fill out MEP data on these as well to make it easy to integrate into the Revit MEP model. And it's automatically picking the diameter. Now it's picking it from the model, but if this model is, you know, we drew, maybe this is at some odd size and we want to make it this a specific size, we could actually pick maybe a standard size here so that when calculations and whatever's done on the MEP side, that it's using that for a connector diameter versus, you know, whatever weird thing we happen to draw for, you know, for our own documentation purposes. So we'll just throw a couple on there, and then, you know, our pipes down here. This is just going to be supply and return. And then once this is all done, we ultimately need to author this to provide some basic information about it, like where is our orientation? This is why we created the UCS, so that it's oriented the right way. And pick an Omni class component designation, so that when this thing is brought into Revit, if you've got a building full of equipment, you need to be able to easily filter what you can see versus what you can't. And as we specify this the right way, this is going to make it so much easier to work with, right? Right, so we could say this is an air conditioner. This may not have been the best way to do it. Packaged air conditioners, there we go. And then we can also include properties from the model. The family type name is going to be useful in Revit so that they can see, rather than just standard like what this is. And this is a single size, so maybe this is like a 40-ton air handler. It's out of the scope of today's webcast, but you can create what we're ultimately going to create is called a Revit family, which if you're an Inventor user, you can think of a Revit family like a content center family, where one or more variable size objects can be brought into the model based on a definition. The family is the definition. It is possible to create families, Revit families from Inventor that would have variable sizes. It's out of the scope of today's webcast, but it is a possibility. We're just going to have the one in here for now. And we can put in a description here, the manufacturer, all of that information. And then if you want to include other properties from the model, like the physical properties, but also any eye properties, you can do that as well. So now that this is authored, we would just export this. It's going to save it out as an RFA. And this is going to be something that Alice can bring straight into Revit, I think maybe even straight from BIM 360, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. So this is going into our RFQ folder. And so this is going to take just a second to save out the RFA. And then just like we synchronized before with Vault, we will synchronize the RFA up to BIM 360. Now, there's one little hole in this workflow. Inventor, it makes the RFA, it puts it into a folder, but it doesn't necessarily link the RFA with the Inventor file or put it into Vault for you automatically. So that is one thing that you do have to get into Vault somehow, is that RFA. Right, and once this is done, it's almost done, I'm sure. We'll just dump that into Vault the old-fashioned way, drag and drop. So we'll call up our Vault client here, and we'll just drag and drop that RFA into the Vault. And then upload to Cloud Drive like we did the other files. Then once that gets uploaded, Alice will then be able to grab that in her and drop it into her Revit model. And we'll just keep an eye on this and make sure it actually goes. So this knows it's going to send it up, and then it should be done here very shortly. There we go. So I'm going to turn it back over to Alice now so that she can show us what it looks like bringing that family in and dropping it into a building model.
All right, let's see if we've got it up here uploaded yet. Let me refresh my screen.
Yeah, I think I saw it there already.
Did you?
Like you didn't even have to refresh. Yeah, it was right there.
There it is. So that's
It's
Our
the
date.
40. It's the
Oh,
40 ton underscore
oh
HCO.
yeah. Yep, there it is right here.
Yep.
So at this point, I can just go over to Revit. And I've got my building here. We've got an urgent care. We've got some things, placeholders up on the top of the roof. This is my roof plan here. So I can just come up and all I want to do is insert that family. So I can say load family, and instead of my local library, I can just go ahead and go to my computer, and much like Forrest did, I can drill into the BIM 360 drive directly from Revit. So I can come into our webinar, go into that manufacturing folder, and I can grab that 40 ton. That's the one, right? Yep, 714. It's not
No,
looking.
that's one from yesterday, I think.
Yeah,
I don't think
maybe it's
your
not.
drive is not synchronized just yet.
Yeah, give it a second.
Yeah, so we're doing this like light speed compared to normal collaboration, I would say, because usually like I would have uploaded it, Alice would have gotten an email, she would have gotten to this when she had the opportunity. We're trying to force this stuff, right? So it's
very quickly, yeah.
Yeah.
Let me refresh this too.
That said, it still like happens within, seconds to a minute or two.
Yeah.
Versus, okay, yeah, where did you put it? I think it's on Dropbox. Can you send me a link and share it? Oh, I forgot to share it.
Right. All right, let's try that again. Let's drill down in here, go back to our project. There we go.
There we go. Yeah.
Okay, so I can open that up. And so it's loading it into my project. And once it's loaded, I can come into my systems, pick on my mechanical equipment. And there's my new AC unit. Then I can come over and figure out where I want to place that in the model. So one thing, question, comment? I thought you were going to say something for us.
Oh, no, yeah, well, I was just going to say, like, it was important, I think, that I specified that as a mechanical component when I authored it. So that it...
Correct. When you put it as an AC unit, then it knew that it was part of the mechanical equipment. That is all part of that whole family and component. So in here, it's the different families and types so that we know in Revit how to handle it and what tool will bring it in.
Okay.
So over in, let's go back for just a minute to our M360. If I go into the HVAC folder and I take a look at my Revit model, just quickly here, we'll see that that model that we just brought in, that air conditioning unit, is not shown here. But what we can do so that Forrest can then see the new model and how it's situated, we can come back into Revit and we can publish these changes so that Forrest can also see those within the project. So go ahead and save that. And since we're running long, I won't bother to show connections, but.
Yeah, that's the thing, is what I authored, Alice could connect those services up that I had specified.
Right, so it automatically shows me these little connections here, and I can just simply pick on them and it'll start creating that duct or that pipe. So let me go ahead and publish that. So if I go to my collaborate, and we'll go ahead and publish that up to the cloud. So in Revit, you are notified whenever there's a new file to be published up. So you'll see it's got a little arrow there, so I know it's ready to be published. Whereas ones that have the checkbox are current, there's nothing that's been changed there. So again, it'll take a minute for it to publish up to the cloud so that we can view it. And if we go back over to our M360, we'll see it starting to update here. So it's thinking. One thing that we didn't point out earlier was that when you do make markups on elements, let me go down to your manufacturing here for a second.
Yeah, it's actually the folder one above, I think, is what we marked, where we marked up. Yeah.
You'll see when we marked it up, it put a little markup on So if you come back in, you can take a look at what has markups, what has issues quite quickly. Let's go back to our HVAC here.
Yeah, so the file's there. We can see version 6 now. It's just, this is the large model viewer preparing the viewable, essentially.
Right, so it's now pulling my entire Revit model, the architectural model that's linked into it, all the parts and pieces. So it's a relatively good sized model. I did try to turn a few things off, but it does take it a minute. So once this is done, I can go ahead and open that up so that Forrest can see it. Anybody else that might be in a meeting, anybody else has access to that folder could look at it. Again, if they have notifications turned on, then they would get notified that there'd been an update to that model. And once we look at the model, we can actually go in and compare the previous version to the most recent version. So we can see it before it was there and then after it was there. It should be pretty close to being done.
Yeah, it's still just amazing that what we just walked through was, I sent you something to review, you mark it up, I make the changes, I upload it, you put it in your model, and then I confirm, like now I'm about to confirm, yes, this is, you know, where we want it to be, all in what, 40
Correct.
minutes?
Yeah.
Which is kind of insane considering, you know, otherwise it's emails and phone calls and printing off PDFs and
redlining and sending it back, and you know, someone tries to do a simulation of where it would fit and how big it is.
Right. Yeah, I've gotten, recently I got, someone had printed out a hard copy, written some stuff by hand, then scanned it back in as a PDF and emailed the PDF. Like, I can imagine all of the steps they went through just to add a couple of notes to something digital, right?
That's taken longer than I would have expected.
Yeah.
I just like to be able to show you how you can actually view it and then compare. But if we run too long.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this is a good opportunity to answer some questions too. And I'm not really seeing any questions yet, which is kind of surprising, but this is a really great time for anyone to, you know, ask any questions you might have about the process or capabilities of BIM 360 or Inventor or this collaboration.
It has something to do with the Zoom meeting running and audio all at the same time too.
Yeah.
Using up some of the bandwidth.
Yeah. Well, I think this is part of it too, is Autodesk's Forge API doing the updates. So if there's a lot of people working this morning, then it could just be in a queue somewhere. Yeah, I think when we did this yesterday, it took. There we go. Yeah, it took maybe like a minute or two, so it's a little long, but yeah. So this is version 6 we're looking at, I think, right?
Yep, right.
With our unit in place.
Right, so it tells me what version it is, and then I can see the unit sitting on top. We can rotate that around and take a look at it. And if I wanted to see, you know, with the positioning before, let's say we had a model in before we extended it out, you know, if we moved it around, each time we publish it, we can go back in and we can compare the views. So I can compare version 5 and version 6. You can go back further. It'll let me know. I'm still thinking. It'll let me know what's changed, what's been added. So between the last 2 versions, I've had one change, and I added a piece of equipment, and it shows me here what that was.
And that to me is just super cool.
Yeah. And you can see it shows removed and modified. So this is a pretty simple change, but oftentimes you've got quite a bit going on.
That's just awesome. So
nice, especially for the engineers working on these projects with all the moving parts.
All right. Well, I think that's the end of our workflow here. You know, ideally, I would have said, yes, this looks good. Customer says, you know, Alice, my customer says, yeah, we're ready to do all this. Maybe at this point, hopefully we would have gotten an order if we were doing this much work. But now we're ready to start building, ship it, and get it installed. So great. Yeah, so I don't really have any more PowerPoints after this, just a slide asking questions. So if there are any questions, and I don't think any have come in just yet, but we'll give it just another few seconds in case somebody wants to ask a question. Okay, here's one that came in. Can you open Revit family files in Inventor? Usually vendors offer Revit files, but not generic 3D models. That's a really good question. I'm gonna take a look here right now. You can open RVT files. You can open up the Revit files themselves. I do not believe you can open up Revit families in Inventor, unfortunately. I do believe you would need Revit for that. Alice, do you know, is there any sort of like family viewer where you could just open up a family and look at it?
Yeah, the Revit trial it just becomes a viewer after the 30 days. So you can open up an RFA or you can open up a Revit file. You just can't do anything with them, but you can view them.
Right, so you could look at it, but you couldn't like take the RFA and then save it out as like a step file. You'd need a license for that.
Correct, correct. Yeah, there's other viewers out there too, but as far as just viewing, that's an option, but not editing.
Okay, yep. All right, and I don't think any other questions have come in, so I think with that, we turn it back over to Ashley to wrap things up.
Well, thank you guys for the presentation, and thank you all for attending today. If you think of additional questions later on, you can simply reply to that confirmation or reminder email that you received from GoToWebinar. We can get that to Forrest or Alice or your sales rep to get any questions answered. Once again, if you could take a few moments to fill out the survey, it will just pop up as we close down. And also remember, you will receive an email tomorrow with a link to the recording of today's presentation. And I don't see anything else, so we will close down for the day. Thanks for attending, everyone. Have a great day.